Before we begin, tell me in the comments where are you watching from. I'd love to know how far our celestial stories reach. There are moments in a soul's journey when the weight of existence becomes unbearable. When the heart, tender and broken, seeks refuge not in the arms of another, but in the silence between breaths. When even heaven itself seems to have turned away, leaving nothing but the cold void of abandonment. It was in such a moment that Elena found herself sitting by the fire, watching the flames dance with a hypnotic indifference, as if they alone understood the language of her grief. The cottage stood at the edge of a vast forest, where ancient trees whispered secrets to the wind, and the earth remembered footsteps from centuries past. She had come here not by choice, but by necessity. The world she had known, the life she had built with careful hands and tender hope, had crumbled like ash beneath her fingers. Her husband was gone, taken not by death, but by betrayal. Her child, the light of her existence, had slipped away in the quiet hours of dawn, leaving behind only the echo of laughter that would never sound again. Elena had prayed. Oh, how she had prayed. On her knees until they bled, with hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white, with words that tore from her throat like broken wings. She had begged for mercy, for understanding, for just one more day with the little soul who had made her world whole. But the heavens remained silent. The gates she had imagined so full of light and compassion seemed locked against her, indifferent to her anguish. And so she had stopped praying. She had stopped believing. She had simply stopped. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks upward into the darkness. Elena pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though the cold she felt had nothing to do with the autumn air. It was a cold that lived inside her bones, in the hollow space where her heart used to beat with purpose. She stared into the flames, seeing faces there. Her daughter's face, the way her eyes would light up when Elena sang to her, the way her small hand would fit perfectly inside her own, the way she would say Mama with such complete trust, as if Elena were the answer to every question the universe could pose. But she had not been enough. She had failed, and heaven had rejected her prayers as insufficient, her love as inadequate, her faith as too small to move the mountain of death that had stood between her and her child. The night deepened around her. The forest grew quiet, that particular silence that comes when even the creatures of darkness pause in their nocturnal rituals. Elena felt it before she saw it, a change in the air, a shift in the quality of the darkness itself. The fire's light seemed to brighten, casting longer shadows, illuminating more of the clearing than it should. She looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. The stars were moving. Not the gentle drift of celestial bodies across the vast canvas of space, but a deliberate, purposeful descent. One by one, they began to fall from their ancient positions, drawing closer to the earth with an impossible grace. They did not streak across the sky like falling stars she had seen before. Instead, they floated downward like feathers, like snow, like prayers finally answered. They settled in the trees surrounding her clearing, perching on branches and hovering in the air, each one pulsing with a soft, ethereal light that was neither white nor gold, but something in between, something that had no name in earthly language. Elena stood slowly, her heart beginning to beat again, not with hope, but with something stranger. Recognition, as if her soul remembered this moment, as if she had been here before, in another lifetime, under another sky. The stars continued their descent until the entire forest glowed with their presence, transforming the ordinary into the sacred, the mundane into the miraculous. And then, from among the lights, a figure emerged. She was both young and ancient, her face holding the paradox of eternity. Her eyes were the color of distant nebulae, shifting between violet and silver and midnight blue. She wore no wings, yet the air around her shimmered with movement, as if reality itself bent in her presence. She walked toward Elena with footsteps that made no sound, and when she stopped, the space between them felt both vast and intimate. "Why have you stopped praying?" the figure asked, and her voice was like wind through cathedral halls, like rain on silent stones. Elena's throat tightened. Because no one was listening. Or perhaps, the figure said gently, you were not ready to hear the answer. Tears that Elena thought had long since dried began to well in her eyes. "My daughter is gone." I begged, I pleaded, I offered everything, and heaven was silent. The celestial being tilted her head, studying Elena with eyes that seemed to see not just her present form, but all her forms, across all her lifetimes. Heaven is never silent, but sometimes, beloved soul, the language it speaks is not the one we wish to hear. "Then tell me," Elena said, her voice breaking. "Tell me why she was taken. Tell me what I did wrong. Tell me why my love was not enough to keep her here." The being stepped closer, and now Elena could see that she was surrounded by others, dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, all made of starlight and memory, all watching with expressions of infinite compassion. "Your love was more than enough. It was everything. But you see only this life, this moment, this single thread in the vast tapestry of existence. You do not see what came before. You do not see what is yet to come." Elena shook her head, anger rising through her grief. "I don't want philosophy. I don't want riddles. I want my daughter. I want to hold her. I want to hear her laugh. I want to watch her grow." "Then look," the being said, and she extended her hand toward the fire. The flames began to shift and swirl, no longer red and orange but silver and blue, transforming into something that was not quite fire, and not quite water, but something that existed between states, between worlds. Images began to form within the dancing light, and Elena found herself looking not at flames, but at scenes from a life she did not remember living. She saw herself in another time, another place. She was younger, or perhaps older. It was hard to tell. She wore different clothes, spoke a different language, but her essence was unmistakable. And beside her stood a man with kind eyes and gentle hands, and in her arms, a child with bright laughter and wild curls. They were happy, so deeply happy that the joy radiated from the vision like heat from the sun. But then the scene shifted. She saw darkness gathering, saw the man fall to an illness that had no cure, saw herself trying desperately to save him, sacrificing everything, calling upon forces she did not understand. She saw herself making a bargain, a terrible bargain, trading her own soul's journey for his life, and she saw it work. She saw him recover, saw him live, saw him eventually find another love and build another life while she faded into shadow, having given up her own progression for his survival. The vision continued. She saw her soul, fragmented and lost, wandering between worlds, unable to move forward, unable to heal, bound by the choice she had made. She saw lifetimes pass, each one dimmer than the last, each one more difficult, as if she were walking through darkness with no memory of light. And then she saw this current life, saw herself being born again, saw the opportunity that had been given, the chance to learn a different lesson, to understand that love does not mean holding on at any cost, that sometimes the greatest love is in the letting go. She saw her daughter, that beautiful soul who had chosen to be born to her, not to stay forever, but to teach her this one essential truth. She saw how her daughter's brief life had been a gift, not a punishment, how every moment they had shared was designed to break open Elena's heart in exactly the way it needed to break, to crack through the hardness that lifetimes of grief had created, to let the light finally reach the wounded places inside. The fire shifted again, and now she saw her daughter, not as a child, but as a radiant being of light, ancient and wise, smiling with such love that Elena felt her knees weaken. She saw that her daughter had never truly been her daughter, but rather a guide, a teacher, a fellow soul who had taken mortal form to help Elena remember who she really was. No, Elena whispered. But even as she spoke, something inside her was shifting, cracking, breaking open like a seed that must split before it can grow. You asked heaven to save her, the celestial being said softly. But her soul did not need saving. She completed her purpose perfectly. It was you who needed to be saved. You who needed to learn that love is not possession, that loss is not failure, that letting go is not abandonment, but the highest form of trust. Elena sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face, but they were different now. Not the tears of despair, but of recognition, of remembering, of finally understanding. I didn't know, she sobbed. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, the being said, kneeling beside her, and now her touch was warm and real against Elena's shoulder. That is why you had to live it. That is why we all must walk through the darkness before we can truly appreciate the light. The stars around them pulsed brighter, and Elena felt something she had not felt in so long she had forgotten its name. Peace. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace of acceptance, of surrender, of trusting that even in the midst of unbearable pain, there was a purpose, a pattern, a greater love holding everything together. But why did it have to hurt so much? Elena asked, her voice small and broken. Because, the being said gently, the soul grows in the breaking. Because compassion is learned through suffering. Because the heart expands through loss. You chose this journey, beloved. Long before you were born into this life, your soul looked at all the possibilities, all the paths, and chose this one. Chose the hard way. Chose the transformative pain. Because you knew, in your deepest wisdom, that this was what you needed to become who you are meant to be. Elena looked up at the stars, at the hundreds of luminous beings watching her with such tenderness. And who am I meant to be? Someone who understands, the being said. Someone who has walked through hell and found heaven on the other side. Someone who can sit with others in their darkest nights and say, without lying, I know. I have been there. I survived. You will too. You are meant to be a light bearer, Elena. But first, you had to learn what darkness really means. If this story is touching your heart, please leave a like and subscribe. It truly helps me keep creating stories filled with light, love, and hope. The vision in the fire changed again, and now Elena saw the future, or one possible future. She saw herself older, wiser, with silver threading through her hair and lines of experience marking her face. She saw herself sitting with a young woman who had just lost a child, holding her hand, speaking words of comfort that only someone who had truly suffered could speak with authenticity. She saw the light that passed between them, the healing that occurred not through platitudes but through shared understanding. She saw herself becoming a vessel of compassion, a bridge between grief and hope. And she saw her daughter, always present, always watching, always loving, not as a ghost, but as a guide, invisible to most but forever felt in the warmth of sunlight, in the softness of rain, in the unexpected moments of joy that would, eventually, return to Elena's life. She's not gone, Elena whispered, finally understanding. She was never truly here in the way you thought, the being said, and she will never truly be gone. She is woven into your soul now, part of your eternal fabric. You will meet her again in another life, another form, perhaps as a sister, a friend, a student, a teacher. The bonds between souls are not broken by death. They only transform. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the truth of it settling into her bones, replacing the cold emptiness with something warm and alive. She thought about all the nights she had cursed heaven, all the times she had felt abandoned, all the moments she had believed her prayers were unheard. And now she understood that every single prayer had been answered, just not in the way she had expected. Not with the miracle of physical survival, but with the deeper miracle of spiritual transformation. "Why now?" she asked, opening her eyes to look at the celestial being. "Why did you come tonight?" "Because tonight you were finally ready to receive. Because tonight, sitting by this fire, you reached the bottom of your descent, and it is only from the deepest valley that we can truly appreciate the mountain. Because your soul called out, not in words but in surrender, and surrender is the language heaven speaks most fluently." The being stood, and the stars began to lift slowly from their perches, rising back toward their celestial homes. But before they departed completely, each one seemed to brush past Elena, and with each touch, she felt a memory return. Not memories from this life, but from others. She remembered being a healer in ancient times, remembered understanding the cycles of life and death with clarity. She remembered being a mother many times before, remembered the joy and the loss, remembered choosing each experience for the lessons it would teach. She remembered her daughter's soul from other lifetimes, other forms, other names, all connected by the same unbreakable thread of love. "Will I see you again?" Elena asked, as the celestial being began to fade, becoming translucent, becoming light. "We are always here," the being said, her voice growing distant, but no less clear. "We are in every act of kindness you witness, every unexpected moment of beauty, every time you choose love over fear. We are the whisper you hear when you listen to your heart instead of your mind. We do not leave, Elena. We simply wait for you to remember that we exist." And then she was gone, and the stars were gone, and Elena was alone by the fire once more. But she was not the same woman who had sat down hours before. Something fundamental had shifted inside her. The grief was still there, would always be there in some form, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a doorway, an opening, a sacred wound through which light could finally enter. She looked down at her hands and saw something she had not noticed before. On her palm, where there had been nothing, there was now a small mark, like a scar but luminous, shaped like a star. She touched it gently, and warmth spread through her entire body. A reminder, a promise, a sign that what she had experienced was real, that she had been touched by something beyond the ordinary world. Elena stood and walked to the edge of the clearing. Dawn was beginning to break on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The forest was waking, birds beginning their morning songs, the wind carrying the scent of pine and earth. Everything looked the same as it had the day before, yet everything was different, because she was different. She thought about her daughter, not with the suffocating grief of absence, but with the gentle warmth of continued presence. She imagined her as she had seen her in the vision, radiant and whole, free from the limitations of physical form, existing in a state of pure love. And she whispered, not a prayer of desperation but one of gratitude, "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for the gift of loving you, even briefly. Thank you for breaking me open so that I could finally begin to heal." The wind picked up, rustling through the trees with a sound that could have been words, could have been laughter, could have been the voice of a child saying "Mama" one more time, not in goodbye, but in eternal greeting. Elena smiled, and it was the first real smile she had worn since the day everything ended, or rather, since the day everything began to transform into something she could not yet fully understand, but was learning to trust. She turned back to the cottage, to the life she still had to live, to the work she now understood she was meant to do. The fire had burned down to embers, but she did not restart it. She no longer needed its warmth. The warmth she needed now came from within, from the knowing that she was not alone, had never been alone, would never be alone. In the days that followed, Elena began to emerge from her isolation. She walked into the nearest village, a place she had been avoiding because she could not bear the sympathy in people's eyes, the awkward silences, the careful words. But now she moved with different energy, and people noticed. They saw something in her face, in her bearing, that drew them close. A young mother struggling with postpartum darkness found herself sitting with Elena over tea, pouring out her fears and frustrations. The woman had barely slept in weeks, haunted by thoughts she dared not speak aloud, terrified that she was failing her infant son, convinced that she was broken beyond repair. Elena listened without judgment, without offering quick fixes or empty reassurances. She simply held space for the woman's pain, and when she finally spoke, her words came from a place of deep knowing. "You are not broken," Elena said softly. "You are breaking open. There is a difference. One suggests permanent damage. The other suggests transformation." The young mother looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "But I feel like I'm drowning, like I'm losing myself." "You are," Elena agreed, and the honesty of it was somehow comforting. "You are losing the self you were before. That self cannot exist anymore. She has been replaced by someone new, someone who carries the weight of responsibility and love in ways she never imagined. It is terrifying. It is also sacred. You are being remade, and all remaking involves destruction of the old form." The woman began to cry, but her tears were different now. Not tears of despair, but of relief, of being seen, of being understood. They sat together as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, and by the time the young mother left, something had shifted in her bearing. She was not cured, not fixed, but she was no longer alone in her darkness. And sometimes, that is enough to keep walking forward. An elderly man named Thomas sought Elena out next, having heard whispers about the woman who understood grief. His wife of 50 years had passed the previous winter, and he was struggling with a loneliness so profound it felt like drowning in an ocean without shores. His children, well-meaning but busy with their own lives, kept telling him to stay positive, to focus on the good memories, to consider dating again. But Thomas did not want to date. He did not want to stay positive. He wanted to honor his grief, to sit with it, to let it be as large and consuming as it needed to be. "They think I should be better by now," he told Elena, as they sat in her small garden, surrounded by herbs that released their fragrance into the warm air. "They think I'm dwelling. They want me to move on." Elena looked at him with eyes that had seen beyond the veil between worlds. Moving on is not the same as moving forward. You do not need to leave your wife behind to continue living. She is part of you now, woven into every breath you take. The question is not whether you will forget her, but how you will carry her with you into whatever time remains. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "I talk to her," he admitted, "every morning. I make her tea even though she is not there to drink it. I tell her about my day even though she cannot answer. Am I losing my mind?" "No," Elena said with certainty. "You are maintaining connection. Love does not end with death. It simply changes form. If speaking to her brings you comfort, if making her tea helps you feel close to her, then continue. There is no rulebook for grief. There is no timeline for healing. There is only what your heart needs, and your heart needs to keep loving her. So love her. Let no one tell you that is wrong." Thomas's eyes filled with tears, and he nodded slowly. When he left that day, he walked with a lighter step, not because his grief had diminished, but because he had been given permission to honor it, to let it be what it was without shame or apology. A teenage girl named Maya appeared at Elena's door one evening, sent by her mother who had heard that Elena was good with lost souls. Maya was 16, angry at the world, feeling trapped in a life that seemed to have no meaning or purpose. She was cutting herself, not deeply enough to require hospitalization, but enough to leave marks, enough to feel something other than the numbness that had settled over her like a suffocating blanket. Elena did not lecture. She did not express horror or disappointment. She simply asked Maya to sit with her as she tended her garden, pulling weeds and watering plants, working with the earth in comfortable silence. After nearly an hour, Maya finally spoke. Everyone says it gets better, that these are the best years of my life. But if this is as good as it gets, I don't want it. Elena paused in her work, looking at the girl with complete attention. These are not the best years of your life. These are some of the hardest. You are caught between childhood and adulthood, between who you were and who you are becoming. Your body is changing, your brain is developing, your emotions are more intense than they will ever be again. It is overwhelming. It is meant to be. Maya looked surprised. You're not going to tell me it gets better? It gets different, Elena said. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, always different. Life is not a straight line toward happiness. It is a spiral, and we revisit the same lessons, the same pains, the same questions at different levels of understanding. What matters is that you keep walking the spiral, that you stay curious about what comes next, that you give yourself permission to not have it all figured out right now. But the pain, Maya whispered. Sometimes it's so big I don't think I can hold it. Elena set down her gardening tools and gave the girl her full attention. Then don't hold it alone. Let it be witnessed. Let it be shared. Pain that is acknowledged loses some of its power. Pain that is hidden grows teeth and claws and tears you apart from the inside. I know this because I lived it. I tried to hold my pain alone, and it nearly destroyed me. It was only when I let others see it, when I stopped pretending I was fine, that I began to heal. She reached out and gently touched Maya's wrist, where the scars were visible. These marks tell a story. They say, I was hurting and I did not know how else to cope. They say, I needed to feel something. Anything. They say, I survived. There is no shame in them. But there are other ways to release pain. Other ways to feel. Will you let me show you? Over the following weeks, Maya came to Elena's house regularly. They worked in the garden together, dirt under their fingernails, sun on their faces. They cooked simple meals, chopping vegetables with focused attention, stirring pots with meditative rhythm. They walked in the forest, naming plants and trees, collecting interesting stones and fallen feathers. And slowly, gradually, Maya found that the urge to cut herself diminished. Not because the pain had gone away, but because she had found other channels for it, other ways to be present in her body, other people who could hold space for her darkness without trying to fix it or make it go away. Elena's reputation as a healer grew, though she never claimed that title for herself. She did not advertise. She did not charge fees. She simply existed as a presence in the village, someone who had walked through the fire of transformation and emerged with wisdom to share. People came to her not because she had answers, but because she had questions. Not because she was happy, but because she was authentic. Not because she had overcome her grief, but because she had learned to live alongside it, to let it be part of her landscape rather than the entirety of her world. Seasons turned. Winter came with its blanket of snow, covering the earth in pristine silence. Elena would sit by her window in the evenings, watching the stars, remembering that night when they had descended to witness her transformation. She no longer saw them as distant, unreachable points of light. She saw them as companions, as fellow travelers on the long journey of existence, as witnesses to all the sorrow and joy that makes up a human life. She began to write during those long winter evenings, not with any intention of publication, but simply as a way to process and preserve what she had learned. She wrote about her daughter, about the night the celestial being had visited, about the visions in the fire and the memories of past lives. She wrote about the people who had come to her seeking solace, about the lessons they had taught her even as she had tried to teach them. She wrote about grief and grace, about loss and love, about the ways the universe conspires to break us open so that we can finally let the light in. A friend who visited one afternoon noticed the stack of pages on Elena's desk and asked to read them. Elena was hesitant, feeling exposed and vulnerable, but something in her friend's earnest request made her agree. The friend read late into the night, and when she finished, her face was wet with tears. "You have to share this," she said. "These words, this wisdom, it is not meant to stay hidden in your desk drawer. There are thousands of people out there who need to read this, who are sitting alone in their own dark nights, who believe they have been abandoned by heaven just as you did." Elena resisted at first, but her friend was persistent. She shared the pages with a few others, who shared them with a few more, and eventually, they found their way to a small publisher who specialized in spiritual memoirs and transformative narratives. The publisher reached out, and after much consideration, Elena agreed to let her words go out into the world. The book was published quietly, without fanfare or marketing campaigns. But it found its audience the way water finds its level, naturally and inevitably. It was passed from hand to hand, recommended in grief support groups, quoted in therapy sessions, referenced in sermons and spiritual gatherings. People wrote to Elena, sharing their own stories of loss and transformation, thanking her for putting into words what they had felt but could not express. One letter in particular moved her deeply. It was from a woman named Sarah, who had lost her only son to suicide. She wrote about the crushing guilt, the endless questions, the way she had stopped believing in anything beyond the physical world. Because if there was a heaven, if there was a God, how could such a thing have been allowed to happen? But reading Elena's book had opened something in her, had allowed her to consider that perhaps her son's death, tragic as it was, might be part of a larger pattern she could not yet see, might serve a purpose in the great tapestry of existence. "I am not saying the pain is gone," Sarah wrote. "I am not saying I understand. But I am saying that for the first time since he died, I can imagine a future where I am not consumed by grief, where I can honor his memory by living fully, by helping others who struggle as he struggled, by becoming a voice for those who feel they have no voice. Your story gave me permission to believe that transformation is possible, that broken does not mean destroyed, that even the darkest night eventually gives way to dawn." Elena kept that letter in a box beside her bed, along with dozens of others that had moved her, that had shown her the ripple effect of her willingness to be vulnerable, to share her pain, to trust that her story might help someone else navigate their own darkness. She thought often about her daughter, about how one small life, one brief existence, had set in motion a chain of events that was still unfolding, still touching lives, still spreading light in ways that could never be fully measured or understood. Years passed, and Elena grew older. Her hair turned silver, her face bore the lines of a life fully lived. Her body moved more slowly, but with no less grace. She continued to receive visitors, continued to sit with the grieving and the lost, continued to share her story with those who needed to hear it. But she also found time for joy, for simple pleasures, for the ordinary magic of existence. She watched sunrises and sunsets with equal reverence. She laughed with friends over shared meals. She tended her garden with loving attention, marveling at the way seeds became flowers, at the way death and rebirth were woven into every aspect of the natural world. On the anniversary of her daughter's death, now many years past, Elena returned to the forest, to the place where she had sat by the fire that transformative night. The cottage was long gone, reclaimed by nature, but the clearing remained. She brought with her a small lantern, a blanket, and a thermos of tea. She settled on the ground as twilight deepened into night, feeling the earth solid beneath her, feeling the air cool against her skin, feeling herself part of the great web of existence. She did not expect visions or visitations. She did not need them anymore. She had learned to recognize the sacred in the ordinary, the divine in the everyday, the miraculous in the mundane. But as the stars emerged one by one, she felt a familiar presence, a warmth that was not physical, but no less real. "Hello, my love," she whispered into the darkness. I hope you can see what your brief life created. I hope you know that you accomplished exactly what you came here to do. You broke me open. You taught me to love without grasping, to grieve without bitterness, to live fully even in the shadow of loss. You gave me a purpose I did not know I needed, and for that, I am grateful. Endlessly, eternally grateful. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a sound that might have been words, might have been music, might have been laughter. Elena smiled, wrapping her blanket more tightly around her shoulders, feeling at peace in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark days when she had believed herself rejected by heaven. She understood now that heaven had never rejected her. She had simply been enrolled in a different kind of school, a more rigorous curriculum, a path that would break her down so completely that she could be rebuilt into something stronger, something more compassionate, something capable of holding space for others in their most profound suffering. The stars watched, as they always did, as they always would. And Elena watched them back, remembering that night when they had descended, when they had borne witness to her transformation, when they had shown her that the universe was not indifferent, but intimately involved in every soul's journey toward wholeness. She sat by the lantern's gentle glow until the moon rose high and the night grew deep. And when she finally stood to make her way back to the village, back to her life, back to the people who needed her, and the work that still waited, she carried with her a sense of completion, of having come full circle, of having honored both the grief and the grace that had shaped her into who she was meant to be. The fire of that long-ago night had burned down to nothing, but its warmth remained, living in her heart, guiding her steps, reminding her that we are never alone, never abandoned, never beyond the reach of love. The stars returned to their celestial positions, but they had left their mark on her soul, a permanent reminder that heaven is not a place we go when we die, but a state of being we can access in every moment if we are willing to see with eyes that look beyond the surface of things. Elena walked on, carried by faith, guided by love, surrounded by the invisible presence of all the souls who had walked this path before her, and all those who would walk it after. She knew now that death was not an ending, but a doorway, that grief was not a weakness but a teacher, that loss was not failure but an invitation to love more deeply, more freely, more fearlessly than ever before. And somewhere, in a realm beyond sight, but never beyond feeling, her daughter smiled, proud of the woman her mother had become, grateful for the courage it had taken to transform pain into purpose, suffering into service, darkness into light. The bond between them remained unbroken, woven through lifetimes, across dimensions, eternal and indestructible, a testament to the truth that love is the only force in the universe that transcends all boundaries, survives all deaths, and connects us all in ways we are only beginning to understand. The night embraced Elena with infinite tenderness as she walked home, and the stars continued their eternal watch, bearing witness to one more soul who had found her way through darkness into light, who had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes we must lose everything to discover what truly matters, that sometimes heaven speaks by remaining silent, that sometimes the greatest gift is the one we never wanted, but desperately needed, and that love, real love, never ends but only transforms, becoming stronger and more beautiful with each passing season, with each life lived, with each heart broken open to receive the light. Thank you for listening till the end. Share what moved you most in the comments, and don't forget to follow and subscribe. If you're new here, welcome to our family of celestial souls.